that one of the reasons why we have made some curious and quite understandable errors has been that we have not realized the allegorical intent of many so-called or believed to be historical passages. Only by the study of the names and of certain particular words and terms are we in a position to actually discover the true intent of the message. Therefore, in this volume, the General examines such words as were used to represent God, Adam, Eve, man in general, the names of tribes and of countries, the names of heroes and of patriarchs. And he found his searching most rewarding, for he was able to point out the great number of instances in which the translation of the proper name immediately oriented the entire concept, released its locked significance, and in some cases rescued the reader from certain rather desperate literal situations, such as the story of Jonah and the whale. The meaning behind the words caused him to do this work, which of course also includes many words and terms which appear in the rituals of the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry. Of this little volume, 100 copies were published, and Pike left the admonition that it was not to be reprinted. It never has been, so there are only 100 copies in existence. This type of restriction, while at his time possibly more important than it is to us today, means that a very large part of his scholarship is locked away from our common knowledge. Another interesting type of work which the General did was to investigate and explore the great Pythagorean theory of number. Many people are interested in numerology, but unfortunately the majority of them cannot use General Pike's reference work. Under the general title of Lectures on Masonic Symbolism, Pike devotes this work to the philosophy, the religious significance, and the allegorical meaning of the concept of number. He derives from most of the classical authors of his time and of ancient times, with particular dependence upon the old texts relating to Pythagoras, with which he was familiar in the original Greek. So here's another rare work which the General prepared. Only 100 copies were issued, and each copy was signed by General Pike as the Sovereign Grand Commander, and was presented personally to one of his fellow members of the Supreme Council. In this particular volume, the member involved inserted a very nice picture of the General in his scholastic years. But this shows the general way in which these materials have been more or less locked away from us and made inaccessible to the average person. Again, by his admonition, this work should not be reprinted. A third volume, which carries part of the same idea, is the continuation of this series of lectures, which he continued into another volume. This entire volume dealing almost entirely with the significance of the Sanskrit Amkara, or the great Amkara syllable, the AUM or OM formula. Here again, the work is restricted to 100 copies, and the book was issued rather with a sketchy beginning and no author's name. This type of situation follows throughout all of Pike's works. His magnum opus, which is the complete rewriting of the degrees of the Scottish Rite, also exists only in 100 copies. Thus he never apparently went forth into what you might term general production of books. And we hope that in the course of time, the rapidly increasing interest in these fields will justify some relaxation of the old restriction, and that gradually demand will bring many of these splendid writings to light. This demand must come not only from Masonic scholars, but from all other groups who recognize the universality of scholarship itself and are therefore not to be over-influenced by any term which seems to be limiting. The General was indeed a universal thinker, free of most of the impedimenta of time and place, and as such, his material is of continuing value. Now, this evening, our principal concern is General Pike's explanations of the reason why he was impelled to achieve a restoration of the theory of ritualistic instruction. And as might be expected of him, his defense, his argument, and if you want to formally call it, his apology for his own position, were backed with constant references to many cultures, including not only the Near East, but also Japan and China, in an effort to explain why ritualism is significant and how it affects the truth seeker in his search for knowledge. Pike begins with a concept which I think we must all accept, namely that ritualism has played an important part in religion since the dawn of time. And in searching among primitive people, where ritualism seems to have its origin, we must come to another almost universal acceptance, namely that ritualism begins within the individual. It is not imposed upon him. It is the expression of his own consciousness. Ritualism is nothing more or less than his thoughts and emotions moving through his body and causing his body to express them. Basically, then, the individual who gesticulates, the primitive savage who does his dance of victory, the individual who in mourning or in pain assumes certain almost inevitable postures, the individual who under stress defends himself through certain contractions of his body, causing him to appear, to draw into himself, or to pass into some slight exaggeration of mannerism. These are all aspects of ritualism, for they are the transforming of abstract qualities of feeling and mentation into some visible, physical, symbolical equivalent. Every action which we perform, even the function of the senses themselves, constitutes some kind of symbolic interpretation or extension of our own consciousness. We do things because we feel in one way, or we think in another. Whenever we perform even a familiar or common action, we are transforming an impulse into a deed. And because the body has certain natural functions and has limitations upon the possible expression of itself, these manifestations take on stylization. We cannot move as we please, we move as we can. And we gradually identify our pleasure and our ability so that our motion is within the possibility or the means of the body which we use. Early in experience, man developed a series of primitive rituals associated with the common experiences of living. Rituals nearly always involved more than one person, although not always. And ritualism gradually began to take the form of a common action. Several individuals uniting in the performance of some particular pageantry of symbolical self-expression. Ritual moved out from the original sanctuary to become part of many different expressions of artistry, creativity. It became involved in theater, in dance. It finds its way more subtly than we realize into painting and sculpture. And poetry is a harmonic ritual of words. Almost everything that we do, if it is done graciously, if it is done beautifully, becomes art. And ritualism, moving from man, is involved in the art of self-expression, the expression of things most meaningful and most important. Ritualism, therefore, also shares to a degree with the meaning of glyphs, pictoglyphs, graphic representations by prehistoric human beings. Thus, a glyph is a form capturing an idea. A ritualistic procedure is an arrangement or a pattern or a device capturing a mood and peculiarly expressing it. We find this in music, where nearly any mood that we desire, particularly the Greek musical modes, may be drawn forth out of us because we are subjected to certain harmonic tonal patterns. To these we respond. Here ritual is in the form of sound, appealing to the ear primarily, but later influencing nearly all parts of our composite nature. Going into ritualism a little further, we find another element introduced. As ritualism grew, it became a disciplined expression. Just as glyphs were simply not drawn as children draw them, without any sense of meaning, lines or forms upon paper. But glyphs had to have a certain figure or a certain stature in order to express a particular idea. So ritualism, coming under an orderly function of man, by degrees took the form of a kind of language of motion. The various figures devised in ritual, the sequences of the actions of the participants, the magnificent assemblies, choruses, processions, all these came under an orderly development, so that a certain ritual or a certain rite became distinctly identified with a certain religion, with a certain meaning. And among the Greeks, these rituals, like architecture itself, became symbolical of certain deities, certain spiritual beings, certain truths, certain broad and deep convictions, which were continuously presented in this form. General Pike points out that in ancient ritualism there was a factor which we apparently have lost. How we lost it, he was not entirely certain. Perhaps today we are in a little better position to clarify this, because the advancement has been made in fields of psychological research. His point is that nearly all rituals in ancient times involved magic, that some kind of a pattern was created which induced a particular and peculiar mood, exercising a kind of mesmeric spell, causing individuals to be bound together and to have an experience